Hello, and welcome to this short explanation about sociological research methods. This is part one, and I'm going to be talking about the connection between theories and methods. Another way of explaining this is that we're going to look at the way in which sociologists think about the world and how the world works, and how they think about how knowledge can be gathered about the world, and how they think we should, do research about the world. So, what is the difference between volcanoes, birds, and chemicals compared to human beings? This is a good way of explaining the issue of research and the different views on research. So there's two schools of thought on this. Okay, one school of thought is the one that's more science-based. And so this is the idea that humans are like objects and processes and governed by forces, like objects and processes and living things in the natural world. So it's the idea that we're predictable in our behaviour, that our behaviour is shaped by external factors that are beyond our control as individuals. And therefore it's possible to develop an identification of what the forces are that determine and shape how we behave and who we are. And therefore, once we've established what those forces are, then we can establish laws to predict the behaviour of human beings in the future. And an example of that is gravity. The law of gravity helps us explain the behaviour of objects in the natural world. Like this book will drop because gravity acts upon the book. And so we know that objects in the natural world are affected by physical forces. So human beings must be affected by social forces, forces which are outside the individual, which pre-exist the individual, and which determine the individual's actions and behaviour. So that is the positivist view. Based on this argument, the natural sciences approach can be applied to human beings. The positivists think that we can develop cause and effect relationships. So we've got different variables. Let's say we're able to measure the behaviour and patterns in the social world. Patterns of behaviour, like the crime rate, so how much crime there is. And we can measure poverty. So we can measure the level of poverty, how much poverty there is in a society. We could also measure other things, like marriage. Now the positivists emphasise the concept of reliability. They say it's very important to gather information that's high in reliability. Now numbers and information in the form of numbers is often easier to repeat, whereas information in the form of words is harder to repeat. If you ask someone a question about can you explain why you're religious, they're going to give more words and it's harder to repeat the exact answer compared to someone saying, are you religious, yes or no? Or do you pray, yes or no? Do you wear the clothing for a religion, yes or no? Do you attend a place of worship, yes or no? So it's easier to repeat quantitative data, and once you've found something over and over again to be the same kind of pattern, then you can say that it's accurate according to this positivist science-based approach. And once you've established it's accurate because you keep replicating the results, you know that the data is factual or accurate, and it's what Durkheim called social facts. Okay, so social fact, it's something that's accurate as a measure of something in social life. It's accurate as a measure of something in social life, a social fact. And so crime, we can measure crime and we can say it's a social fact, it's accurately measured. And poverty can be measured, and likewise we can say that we know what the poverty level is, so it's a social fact. And marriage can be measured. We know how many people are getting married each year, so we know the marriage rate, so it's a social fact. So it's this idea we can gather information from the outside world. And this is called empiricism. If we can gather information with the senses, then instead of just coming up with ideas in our mind, we're actually testing ideas or finding out information to develop ideas from the outside world. And so the positivists think that the outside world exists outside the individual, and we can find information out about that outside world. That's very important because later on we'll discuss problems with that idea with interpretivism. So, if we can find these facts, then we can start to gather ideas about forces which govern the behaviour of people. So the crime rate could be a sign that something is wrong in society or something's not functioning properly. Because remember, the functionalists are influenced by positivism, this science-based approach, and they think that we can study society just like biologists study the human body. And so we can study the different parts of society like the family, the criminal justice system, and the government. Just like in biology, we can study the way in which the brain works, which governs or seen as governing the body, and the way the liver processes the toxins, just like the criminal justice system tries to, remove crime and bad people, and the family is like the heart, so it's kind of giving us values and making us care. So, based on this idea, something like crime can be measured, and then we can find out what is happening that is maybe not working, or what's happening to allow that to take place. So it could be argued, for example, the family is not socialising children properly, so they don't know the difference between right and wrong, and so crime occurs because people need to know the difference between right and wrong. Or it could be poverty. People are driven to commit crime because of poverty. So we might find patterns where people who are poor commit more crime. So we can see that there could be a connection, what we call a causal relationship between crime and poverty and between crime and marriage. So where people are poor, they might commit more crime. And where people are growing up in a family without, a married couple, they might commit more crime. And if that's the case, then it might be that crime is a result of, according to functionalists, a loss of integration. In other words, they're not integrated or bonded into society, not held back from their own selfishness by the kind of bonds of society, which is like, someone who, like a dog, that's held back from, stealing a bone because it's held back by a chain around its neck. You could say, it's a bit of a kind of dark way of looking at it, but you could say that the family, prevents us from committing crime because we feel guilty, we feel ashamed, we don't want to let our family down and so on. We've got responsibilities to our children and all of that. With poverty, again, there's a sense of people who are poor might be driven to commit crime because people are selfish and can't kind of think for themselves in a way that would help them, get social mobility in society. And some people in that situation turn to crime instead of doing the right thing, like education and work. So again, this view of people is kind of assuming several things about people. It's assuming that people behave in a predictable way because they're governed by social forces like integration outside the individual. It also might assume that there are some aspects of human nature, like selfishness, which might be explored and proven by finding out these facts. But it's based on the idea of proving things with reliable data. So we can only say that it's true if we find the same findings over and over again. So if we find that crime occurs where there's poverty, and crime occurs where there's no marriage or where there's single parenthood more, then we can start to establish that that's a fact, predict the behaviour based on laws, and then maybe do something about it by introducing some kind of guidelines or governmental laws. Once we start to do that, that's social policy. And that can be one of the reasons why we choose to study something and do something about it, is because of social policy. We want to help the government to improve society to get rid of social problems like poverty, which is said to cause crime. So that's a summary. I hope that it's helpful, and let me know if you have any questions or queries in the space below.